Peter chapter 1, beginning in verse 6, this is God's word, eternally true. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine and may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the goal of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Here ends our reading. We have a response of thankfulness. Thankfulness that's printed at the bottom left of your bulletin there. The word of the Lord. Thanks indeed. Let's pray. I like to, some of you know about me, I like to run. I didn't run in high school or junior high. I played soccer, so I would just run in the summers to get in shape for the soccer season. It was in the fall, but what I do around here is I finally got the courage up after a couple of years of running, maybe 12 years ago, something like that, to do the Clayton 5K, which is downtown in Clayton here. So I did that, and I was hoping the first time. I didn't mark out distances in my neighborhood. I didn't know how far I was running. I would just set my watch for a certain number of minutes and run that number of minutes, and my watch would go off. I started at 15 minutes and then up to 20 and have had various things. And when my watch goes off, I stop. And so that's coming up this next Saturday, and I was thinking about this word from God in 1 Peter again this morning as I woke up and looked over these things and realized how parallel this is to the task of running. When I run, even though I've run pretty much every day for years and years, you get this sensation in your legs that doesn't feel good. You get this sensation in your heart and in your lungs and in your arms that doesn't feel good. Runners talk about a runner's high. I don't know what that is. I don't. I like running. I like the fact that I ran. I'm glad when it's over. And I feel good that I've done it. It makes me feel good afterward. But when I'm doing it, it typically doesn't feel very good. It's hard. I had a pastor friend up in Wake Forest, and he ran a 10-mile in Chapel Hill a couple Saturdays ago, and he put that on Facebook that he was going to run that tomorrow. This was on a Friday. I'm running this 10-mile in Chapel Hill tomorrow, and my wife put on there, that sounds terrible. Running doesn't feel good, and so you wonder, like I wondered during that first 5K. 5K is 5 kilometers is 3.1 miles. 3.1 miles. I didn't know if I'd be able to get through it without stopping, and that was my goal the first time I ran 5K, to get through without stopping and walking. And when I run and feel these pains through my body and my legs and chest and so forth, the question is, what does this mean? How do I make sense of this? Do these feelings I have right now in my heart and in my lungs and in my legs mean that I will die in 10 yards if I keep doing this? Okay? When you're starting to run, you don't know. But one of the things you do when you keep running is you know how it feels in your body. And that's even how you run a race. You know how you feel inside and what's going on in your body. What does this mean? How do I make sense of the pain that I have in my body? And in light of feeling bad, you can find out and wonder, how will I survive? Will I survive to make it to the finish line? If I keep going like I'm going, when I'm feeling this pain, will I make it? Will I make it to the finish line? And that's what this passage is about. When we feel pain in life, when we go through, as Peter says, various kinds of trials, when things aren't going our way, when we are suffering for our faith, will we make it? Is there some assurance here? And indeed, there is. And as you look in your outline here, if you want to fill out blanks in an outline, you're welcome to do that. You can just listen if you want to. But here's the point of this text. Peter says to us, God says to us through Peter, endure through the testing of your faith. Endure through the testing of your faith. You know, if you've been here in the church for a while, the gospel, the message of Jesus is not believe in Jesus and everything will work out. In fact, the believers in Scripture would prove otherwise. Believe in Jesus and your life will get really difficult. Okay? Paul's life was going just fine. He was on the fast track in his career and all that kind of thing, and he believed in Jesus, and all of a sudden people were trying to stone him and put him in jail and kill him. Okay, so it's false to think that being a Christian means life is just going to go along smoothly because you've believed. The opposite is true, and that's what Peter is saying to us here. And if Peter didn't say it, we could just look somewhere else in Scripture. We saw almost a parallel passage in James 1, 2 through 4. Trials, because of your faith, come. It's not the opposite. It's not because of your faith, trials won't come. It's because your faith is there, trials will come. It's true for Paul, true for David, true for Jesus. Look what Jesus' faith in his Father, my Father will rescue me, led to happening to him. He was put on a cross. And there are three kinds of trials that we have for our faith, really. These are not blanks for you. They're just free. One is people may say, you believe this? You believe in Jesus? And that's a test for us. When we say yes and we get ridiculed, okay, that's a test. That's one kind of test. Another kind of test that comes along is those who don't believe say, what, you're not going to join in with us and do this thing? What, you have qualms with doing this? Well, yeah, I'm not going to do this. Well, why? And we get ridiculed. So that's another kind of test of our faith that comes along. And then perhaps there's a third, well, perhaps there are probably more than this, that's why I say perhaps, but a third kind of testing that comes along is that we have things that just happen to us privately. When we're sitting in a room or we're somewhere and nobody sees it, nobody ever will, but it's wrong. That's another kind of testing we have in our faith. And the question we have here is, how do we make sense of the pain we go through as we're being tested? The pain we go through, the uncomfortableness we experience, the suffering, the grief we experience when we're being tested or when we're going through trials for our faith. So the question is this, number one in your outline there, how? How can you endure? Peter begins to address this here in this passage. How can you endure? And he gives an answer here. And he says, you can endure by rejoicing. You can endure by, number one, by rejoicing. And we see this in verse 6 and verse 8. Look at verse 6. In this you greatly rejoice. So he puts rejoicing out there as something that's a key factor as we suffer various kinds of trials. And then in verse 8, look there. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with inexpressible and glorious joy. Joy and rejoice, two forms of the same word. We're filled with joy. This is part of us getting through our trials, getting through the testing we have because of our faith in Jesus. So James puts it this way, James 1:2, Carl read it for us. Consider it pure joy. Again, rejoice. This is what James tells his readers to do about 20 years before Peter was writing. He says, consider it joy, brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. So joy is a key element for us getting through trials or testing of our faith. Note that you probably won't endure if your faith is all drudgery. That's a conclusion we can get here. Both writers in helping James and Peter and helping believers get through trials, getting through tough things, getting through things that test our faith, bring forward joy as the solution. If your faith is just drudgery and just discouragement all the time, woe is me, Eeyore, okay, we probably won't make it through. If our faith is not a matter of rejoicing, we won't make it through. Rejoicing is important. Lifted spirits are important. We know this in work settings. If there's no hope for our company, that's a hard place to be. We know that in athletic situations too. If there's no, we can do this, guys. If you're down 12 points and there's 10 minutes to go, and nobody says, we can do this, we can beat these guys, you're probably not going to beat those guys. But this happens in sports all the time. Somebody says, this game is ours, and you're 12 points behind. When I run 5Ks and feel this pain in my legs and my legs tightening up, if I just had utter discouragement, I don't feel good, something's wrong, I would probably just quit. But if there's some kind of encouragement, I can do this. I've done this distance before. I run over this distance every day. Then when I'm out there on the course, I'm encouraged. I know I feel bad, but I've felt bad. I've experienced this bad feeling before, and I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it to the finish line, and I'll probably do okay. So rejoicing is a key. So that's how we endure, by rejoicing. The second thing is this, and number 2 in your outline there. How can you rejoice? How can you rejoice in the midst of a life of trials for your faith? How is this possible? We're learning here that, and we've known that our faith means trials, our faith means testing, our faith means suffering, grief, as Peter puts it here. How can we have joy? How can we have rejoicing as we're going through a life of trials for your faith? Well, the first thing that Peter gives us, and it's your A point here, it's a base that will ground you. A base that will ground you. It'll give you your bearings so that you can rejoice. And it's this, A in your outline there. You can rejoice if you realize that trials for your faith, are the norm. Trials for your faith are the norm for the Christian life. Verse 6, look there. In this you greatly rejoice, though now, for a little while, that's your life. Your life is a little while in light of eternity. Okay? Now, for a little while, if necessary, you may have had to suffer grief and all kinds of trials. Okay? This is the norm. Peter writes this, he says, I know you guys are all dealing with this, just as James wrote this. You have trials, so consider it all joy. There's no solution offered to get out of trials. There's no, if you would have done this differently, you wouldn't be in a trial for your faith right now. That's not what God gives to James. That's not what God gives to Peter to communicate to us, his people. It's not getting rid of trials. It's going through trials and knowing that trials are the norm. 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18. You can see that in our call to worship and declaration of the gospel this morning. Look at that there on the left-hand side of your bulletin toward the top. Paul writes, therefore, in the midst of all these trials, that's what Paul's talking about. The whole book of 2 Corinthians is about Paul's suffering for proclaiming the gospel, suffering for being a Christian. And he says, therefore, we do not lose heart. We're encouraged. We rejoice. Though outwardly we are wasting away. We're going through trials. We're going through tribulations. We're going through difficulties. We're suffering grief for our faith. He says, we don't lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. Our souls are being renewed. For our light and momentary troubles, if you know Paul's life, he's calling his trials light and momentary. He had serious trials. But he understood in light of eternity that these were light. In light of hell, these were light. In light of eternity, these were momentary. Light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal. See Paul's perspective? My life is momentary, but eternity is out there. An eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, the here, the now, our lives of this momentary affliction, but what is unseen, eternity, Jesus, faith. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So know that the seen stuff is the norm. It was the norm for Paul. It was the norm for Peter. It was the norm for James. It was the norm for Jesus. I will show you, he says to Paul, how much you'll suffer for my sake. So just understand when you're running your 5K that the way your legs feel is normal. You're not going to die in 10 yards from now. When your legs feel this way, you can still run another 4 miles or another mile or whatever it is. Okay? So realize that trials for your faith are the norm for the Christian life. All Christians experience this. Look at, if you're there in 1 Peter, just flip over to chapter 5. Peter stays on this theme. And as he rounds out to get to the end of his, as he gets to the end of his book, verses 8 and 9, chapter 5 of 1 Peter, verses 8 and 9. Look there, verse 8. Be self-controlled and alert. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Now, hear this, verse 9. Resist him, standing firm in the faith. Keep running. Keep running in your faith. Stand firm in your faith, because you know that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same kind of sufferings. Everyone, all Christians endure these same kind of sufferings throughout the world all the time. So know that that's the norm. Don't be discouraged. Nothing's wrong. Trials for your faith are a normal part of the Christian life. Now B. Reasons you can rejoice. You know, you got your base there. When trials are happening, nothing's wrong. This is normal. Now, how can I rejoice, Peter? How can I rejoice, Lord, in the midst of the trials that I experience because I believe in Jesus? Shouldn't I believe in Jesus and things just go well for me? I'm doing what's right here. I've believed. But we endure trials. So the first reason why we rejoice. How do we rejoice in the midst of a life of trials? B, by realizing that trials for your faith in Jesus, are just for a little while. They're just for a little while. And that little while is a little while in light of eternity. That's how Peter phrases it here. A little while in light of eternity. Look at verse 4 here in chapter 1. Verse 4. He says, I need to get there. Put my Bible away too soon. Verse 4. And into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. That's what we're to have in our minds as we go through trials. The eternal. An eternal inheritance. Something that will never spoil or fade. Things in life spoil, they fade, they get mold, they break, but not our inheritance in heaven. And so we have our minds on this, and that's why Peter says in verse 6, in this we rejoice. We greatly rejoice. God has been greatly merciful to us, and he's given us an eternal inheritance. So in the midst of trials, we can rejoice. Or down to verse 6 there, he says we can rejoice because our suffering is just for a little while. And we looked at Paul there, 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 17. So we realize that our trials are just for a little while. And then C, the second reason we can rejoice. Not only are our trials just for a little while, and there's an eternity of goodness waiting for us, but we can rejoice when we realize that our enduring faith in the midst of trials, this is your C point there, your enduring faith in the midst of trials for your faith, your enduring faith is more valuable than anything else you can possess. Your enduring faith is more valuable than anything else you do or can possess. Verse 7. Look there in verse 7. These trials have come, so that your faith of greater worth than gold. And even when gold is refined by fire, it still perishes. It's a perishable thing. But your faith is not like that. So your faith is more valuable than gold. The richest treasure you can have is your faith. That's what Peter says. So why is our faith of greater value to us than gold? First thing, why is your enduring faith the most valuable thing about you? That's your blank there. Why is your enduring faith the most valuable thing about you? Let's take a look at number 2 first. So skip down to number 2, because your genuine, enduring faith is the thing that will result in the salvation of your souls. Your faith is the most valuable thing to you. It's more valuable to you than gold because it is your faith is the thing that will result in the salvation of your soul. So look there in verse 9 there. It says, you're receiving the goal of your faith, the salvation of your souls. It's the final prize, that word goal, if you like logic, it's the word telos there. It's the final landing place. What you get at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. The salvation of your soul. That's what your faith gets for you. The salvation of your soul. So we see that in verse 4 and verse 9. It results in our receiving an eternal inheritance. If your faith is what results in an eternal inheritance, then that's more valuable than anything else. You know, if my father's will gave me an inheritance of $1 million, it didn't. But if my father's will had given me an inheritance of $1 million, that's going to eventually, that money's going to be burnt up. Okay? I'm going to burn through that or die before I can. But an eternal inheritance, what could I get? What could I have that would give me an eternal inheritance? Well, Peter says it's your faith in Jesus. Your faith in Jesus gives you an eternal inheritance. So it's more valuable than gold. It's more valuable than a father's will. Now note, a couple of things to note. Gospel note number 1. It is not this. It's not this. It's not that your endurance will earn you the salvation of your soul. Your endurance and what you do will not earn you the salvation of your soul. That's not what Peter's saying. And we remember Ephesians 2:8 and 9, that it is by grace you're saved through faith. That's a gift of God. Not as a result of works, that no one should boast. Okay? So your enduring does not earn you an eternal inheritance. Okay? It's not that. The gospel tells us that. Number 2, or B, gospel note number 2. It's this, rather. It is that faith has its final prize, the salvation of your soul. And that this faith is a faith that holds up through testing. Okay? So verse 2, we see that verse 3, we see that God the Father has given you spiritual birth. He's chosen you out. He's given you faith. Verse 9, this brings us to receiving that final goal, the goal of faith. John 1:13, Ephesians 1:4. The Father has given you spiritual birth. He has made you his child. He has given you this faith, and this faith results in you, in the end, receiving the salvation of your soul. So Mark chapter 4, parable of the soils. Carl read that for us this morning. And it talks about four kinds of people when they hear the gospel. Four kinds of people when they hear the gospel. The first three are not believers. The last one is. Okay? First person hears the gospel, and he's like the person that's the hard path. He says, oh, Jesus, I don't believe that stuff. Never penetrates him. Never comes into the church. Never really considers it. That's the hard path. And the gospel, as people proclaim that Jesus is God and he forgives sins, that's the seed that's being sown by the farmer who goes out sowing seed. And the hard path is people who say, oh, I don't believe that stuff. They don't consider it. But there are two kinds of people who consider it. And they come into the church for a while and they say, hey, this is great. And they rejoice. And for whatever reasons, they have a whole new set of friends. People are nice. There's Pop Providence every third Sunday. Or whatever it is. That's a joke. They're good things. Or my parents approve of me now because I said I believe in Jesus. Okay? All kinds of things that come into play. Reasons people come in. Maybe there's a network of people I can sell my stuff to. Sometimes that happens. Maybe there's a way I can get prominent in the church. That can happen too. And Jesus describes those people in these other two kinds of soil. He says, there's this kind of soil that has weeds in it. And when other cares of this life come up, those people head out of the church. They were excited at first, but they head out. So he tells his disciples there, you're going to have people who say they believe in me, and they're going to come in, they're going to be involved in the church for a while, and then they're going to get interested in other things. Sports, business, whatever, and they're going to head out. Oh, that was all right for a while, but I'm out of here. I'm going to watch NFL pregame instead in the morning on Sundays. So they head out. Then there's this other kind of person. It's the rocky soil. And he comes in and he says, oh, wow, my sins can be forgiven. That's great. Now, this is not true faith. This is apparent faith. Comes in, he's excited. This is great. For whatever reason, he comes in. But then he starts realizing, if I go to church, people make fun of me. That's the rocky soil. And the roots never are down there to suck nutrients up from Jesus by his Spirit. And so when persecution comes, the person says, well, I'm out of here. But then there's that fourth kind of soil, and these are believers. And this fourth kind of soil is the good soil. And when seed, the gospel is planted on this good soil, when seed comes to one who is elect before the foundation of the world, Ephesians 1:4, that this seed not only rejoices, but stays with it and grows roots that are deeper and deeper. When other cares of this life come, they say, but that stuff doesn't matter. And when persecution comes, they say, but Jesus is worth it. I'm here and I'm not leaving. And they become fruitful because the Spirit of God is in them. So that's the parable of the soils. True faith that comes from God the Father choosing you, verse 2 in 1 Peter 1 here. Faith that came out of God the Father choosing you to be his child. That's John 1:13. A child of God, not by the will of man, not by the decision of man, but by God. Before the creation of the world, Ephesians 1:4, according to that which he gave you new birth, verse 3 here in this passage, God the Father gave you new birth. Faith that comes by this. Faith in which, like we saw in the parable of the soils, some people are given eyes to see and ears to hear, and some people remain deaf and blind. Jesus called the Pharisees, the most religious people of his day, blind because they didn't see the kingdom. They didn't see that their king was standing before them. They rejected their king. They put their king on a cross. They said, we have no king but Caesar. So Jesus says, believers, those who have faith in Jesus, are good soil. And this faith in Jesus that is given to one who has been given new birth by the Father above is a faith that results in salvation. It's not that you endure to get salvation. It's you have faith that endures until salvation comes. See the difference? If you have been born again, you possess a faith in Jesus that will not go away. You're the good soil. When persecution comes, when other interests come, when other things come to draw you away from Jesus, that faith remains steady. That faith perseveres. It perseveres to the end. And so Peter says, rejoice. You've been born from the Father above. In his great mercy, he's given you birth. And as a part of this birth, your eyes see and your ears hear, and you know what's true. And this faith will endure until you arrive, verse 9, at that goal of your faith, or the final prize of you having this enduring faith, the salvation of your souls. So in the midst of your being tried for your faith, in the midst of you being tested for your faith, rejoice, because that faith that you have for which you are suffering grief right now is the same faith that will get you your eternal inheritance. The same faith that will lead you all through your life in faithfulness to Jesus and will result in the salvation of your soul. The reason you're being persecuted, the cause of your persecution, is the cause of you being encouraged. If you didn't have faith, you wouldn't be persecuted. And because you are being persecuted, it's evidence that you will have salvation on the last day. Does that make sense? Okay. Back up to number 1. So why is your enduring faith the most valuable thing about you? Because it's your enduring faith, the faith God has given you, that will have as its final prize the salvation of your soul. And then, number 1, our second thing, why is your enduring faith the most valuable thing about you? Because your enduring faith will result in you and Jesus receiving praise at Jesus' second coming. Your enduring faith will result in you and Jesus receiving praise when Jesus comes again. This is the awards ceremony. Okay, so you know when trials are happening, your legs feel bad, you know you'll make it because you have the stuff in you. God gave you a body to get to the finish line. That's your point 2 there. But point 1 is when you get to the finish line, guess what? There's reward. Now, I'm not going to finish first. I'm well past that point when I go next Saturday. I won't finish first unless there's some miracle. But there won't be a miracle because God does miracles to draw people's attention to Jesus, not to give them a car or to make them first place in a race. But this is the awards ceremony, a prize at the end. Praise to you and Jesus at Jesus' second coming. Let's talk about this. First of all, A. What this means to you, your faith means, your endurance in faith means commendation, praise from Jesus to you at his return. So look at verse 7 here in this passage. Verse 7. These trials have come so that, here's the purpose of your trials. 2 things. So that your faith of greater worth than gold, and that's what we've been talking about, why it's of such great worth, which perishes even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine, and may result in praise and glory and honor, not in our life, but when Jesus Christ is revealed. When Jesus comes back and is revealed before all mankind as being who he said he was and is. Okay? So commendation, praise from Jesus to you at his return. Matthew 25, verses 14 through 23. Carl read this for us. God has given each of his believers gifts. And he says for us to use our gifts for his kingdom. And when he comes back, when we've endured, when we have used our faith and what he has given us for his glory, for his kingdom, and we say, look, Father, you gave me these gifts, and I use these gifts in this way for your son's glory. He says, and these are the words of Jesus when we see him, well done, good and faithful servant. Commendation from Jesus to you when Jesus Christ is revealed. Jesus is our master. Jesus has distributed to us gifts to use in his kingdom, the church. He's given us faith so that we endure and bring him glory. And we hear this commendation from him when we return. Well done, good and faithful servant. What greater goal in life could you have than to hear from Jesus, well done, good and faithful servant? Okay, if you're in a company and the CEO calls you up to his office and he says, well done, good and faithful servant. I wish everybody in our company were like you. In that company, there's no greater praise than you can get. And the King and the head of the church, Jesus, is waiting to give you that praise. And this was what Peter brings forward to us. As we endure through trial, the trials, getting through trials, will bring us praise from Jesus in the end. If faith were easy, there'd be no reason for praise. Hey, great job rolling down the hill, asleep. It's great job going up the hill with weight on your back when people were telling you, don't do it. Why are you doing that? If you've been in a company and you've been through hard times and you've worked hard, or if you've been on an athletic team, or if you've been in musical training and you work and you work and you work and you get to the goal of your work and your coach or your instructor or your boss says, way to go. You know how that feels. And this is the promise Peter reminds us of. When you're going through that hard time, when you're going through struggles in life, when you're being persecuted for your faith, keep at it. Endure, because that's what Jesus will say. Remember that time that was going on? Way to go. Way to be faithful. When everybody was telling you to quit, you kept at it. Way to go. What greater commendation can you get? We all have daddy issues, right? What greater commendation would we want on earth than our dad saying, you're the greatest child a guy could ask for. Every time I'm around my friends, I'm talking about you. And you've never known this before. And he tells you that. And he shows you videotape of him doing that. Wow. Wouldn't that be great? But this is Jesus, our master, the one whose commendation is accurate, saying, well done, good and faithful servant. So endure and get that commendation from Jesus, that way to go under hardship. Get that, be motivated by that in your lives. And then the second thing, and that's okay. It's okay to be motivated to receive praise from Jesus. Jesus is always doing that, encouraging us to get praise from him. And then the second thing, there's a second kind of praise, and that is praise to Jesus. Jesus will get praised, in other words, as we endure through our trials. Praise to Jesus because your faithfulness at great cost. Praise to Jesus because your faithfulness at great cost, trials, suffering, grief, communicates in the deepest possible way that Jesus is worth it. That Jesus is worth it and thus brings him honor. When we get to the end of our lives, and we've lived lives where we have endured in our faith, what we have communicated in a deeper way than any other way that can communicate, ways that cost us our skin, so to speak, Jesus gets honored because our lives have said Jesus is worth it. Jesus is worth me being made fun of. Jesus has made people giving me weird looks like I'm a weirdo for believing in Jesus. Jesus is worth me saying, no, I can't do that. Jesus is worth me not going to this thing because it's on Sunday morning and I worship God then. We all know it. This is not a Christian society. And when we do things, when push comes to shove, we're asked to behave in non-Christian ways. We're asked to disown Jesus in our actions, in our activities, and in our speech. But when we are faithful to Him, when this enduring faith shows itself in our lives, Jesus receives praise because our lives have communicated He is worth it. No matter what it costs us, He's worth it. Peter was stealing, I mentioned to you a few weeks ago, he's writing in the 60s, AD 60s. And Nero was emperor of Rome, and he was persecuting the church there in Rome. And Peter was in a Roman prison, and Nero took Christians and he impaled them and doused them with fuel and lit them on fire to light his garden at night. They communicated, Jesus is worth it. I am a Christian. Impale me if you want. Douse me with fuel if you want. Put me in Nero's garden if you want. But Jesus is worth it. That eternal inheritance is worth it. He is worth it. Even if He doesn't give me an eternal inheritance, He is worth it. And that's what our faithfulness in trial does. It communicates Jesus is worth it. When I'm out there running and I don't feel good, when I have to get up, which I do before my daughters get up for school, so I can get out there and run, it's because I think it's worth it. It's worth it. And Jesus is certainly worth it. Perhaps we know the Christmas song, "What gift shall I bring Him? I'll give Him, or I'll bring Him my heart." Well, Peter tweaks that a little bit. Not that Peter knew this song written in 1990 something. But Peter tweaks this. What gift should you give Him? Give Him your life. Give Him faithful obedience when it costs you something. That honors Him. Okay, now I listed there for you Job. First 2 chapters of Job. Satan comes up to God in heaven and he says, hey, the only reason Job praises you is because his life is so great. See how many cattle he has. See all his kids. See all the land he possesses. God says, fine. Take away his stuff. Cause his life to be miserable. And there are a couple of iterations of this. And he does. And all these things toward the end of chapter 2, Job does not sin in what he does and says, because he will not curse God, even though he's encouraged to curse God when Job's cattle is taken away, when his land is burned up, when his kids are killed. All this stuff happens to him. But he will not curse God. He remains faithful, and God is honored. And that's why God says, have you considered my servant Job? God is honored by our faith that follows him. So a couple of words of encouragement to you here. You know why you're here this morning? This is most likely true for you here this morning. You know how you got here? You're here this morning because your faith has endured. That's your blank there. You're here this morning because your faith has endured. If your faith weren't genuine, you'd be already gone. But because your faith is an enduring faith, it brought you here this morning. Okay? Now, second thing, our conclusion. Our conclusion. Rejoice. That's your blank there. Rejoice. And here's how you can rejoice. Here's what's the source of great rejoicing, as Peter puts it in verse 6 here. Great rejoicing that is in you and that is to be for all Christians. Rejoice at the revealing of Jesus Christ. Your enduring faith will have this threefold value. First, it will result in your salvation. Rejoice, because the very faith that's bringing you trouble now is the very faith that will bring you salvation when Jesus comes again. Okay? Rejoice, secondly, because in your bringing honor to Jesus, and in your receiving the most important commendation you will ever receive, commendation from Jesus himself. Well done, good and faithful servant. Your enduring faith will result in your salvation. It will result in your bringing honor to Jesus, and it will result in you receiving commendation from Jesus himself. Well done, good and faithful servant. And the more trials you go through, the bigger that well done is. See Peter's comment there. These have come, verse 7. These trials have come so that your faith may be proved genuine and may result in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. So chin up. Be encouraged in your enduring faith. Your faith will endure. God has done great things already in you through your faith. He's already caused you to suffer and to be faithful through suffering and trials. And so endure, because God will continue to do great things, and your faith will bring you these things about which Peter talks here in this passage. Let's pray.